On Tuesday, Minnesota State Senator Steve Drazkowskis, a Republican, voted against a bill that would provide free school lunch and breakfast for students in the state. Here are his remarks.
Mr. President, I have yet to meet a person in Minnesota that is hungry. Yet today. I have yet to meet a person in Minnesota that says they don't have access to enough food to eat. Now, I should say that hunger is a relative term, Mr. President. You know, I had a cereal bar for breakfast. I guess I'm hungry now. That, to some, might be maybe that's the definition of the bill. I don't know. I didn't see a definition of hunger in the bill, Mr. President. But I think most reasonable people suggest hunger means you don't have enough to eat in order to provide for metabolism and growth.
Now, I used this clip at a radar recently. I found it to be really surprising, especially given that we've been in the middle of a very national public conversation about the high price of groceries, how ridiculous the cost of eggs are, how people have been struggling with the consequences of inflation in the middle of a pandemic. The idea that would, of course, also affect people who are already food insecure and really highlight the need for programs like free school lunch and free school breakfast. It seems like a no-brainer. What do you make of this here, Batya?
I believe that the number of child poverty in Minnesota is somewhere around 10%. And the fact that the governor does not know that is horrifying. What could be more important than feeding children? Like, what if they're not hungry, but their parents are not giving them nutritious food? Like, what could be more important than making sure a child has a full belly before they sit down and open their textbook and learn how to add and read? And I mean, my God, is there anything more horrific than the idea of a child going hungry?
I don't know.
Where are these people coming from?
This casual idea that hunger, as understood kind of from a public policy perspective, is some subjective silliness like, oh, my stomach is growling because I didn't eat my Cliff Bar this morning, is, I don't know. It really says a lot, I think, about Drazkowskis' understanding of what's going on in his own state under his nose. But he's not the only one. Apparently, the topic of free school lunch was brought up to Daily Wire co-founder Ben Shapiro yesterday on the platform's All Access live stream. And here's what he had to say.
School lunches are not going to solve the problem of child hunger at any serious level. If there is a problem of children actually starving, that is a child endangerment scenario to which CPS needs to be called. If you're talking about like actual child starvation, the truth is it does not take that much money to feed a child. I know I have 3 of them. You should be feeding your child before you feed yourself. It's that simple. There's a much deeper problem at work than school lunches if kids are legitimately starving.
Look, okay, so it's complicated. I like Ben, and but I don't agree with him about economics on most things. But I will say, like, what he's talking about there, like, yeah, if a child is starving, clearly there's a much deeper problem there. The problem is that often people will separate children from their parents. Our foster care system is deeply flawed and deeply problematic. And often a parent is either ignorant or busy or just poor. And to penalize them in such a way when there's a much easier fix that is much less traumatic, that is like, look, let's decide as a society that this is much more important to us. We know, for example, that obesity now is very much an epidemic among lower income Americans because people don't understand often how to feed their children in a nutritious way. I'm sorry, that's just like, maybe that sounds judgmental. We know that that is true. Like, given that that is the case, like, what you're going to take away children from parents who give them McDonald's because they can't afford better or don't know any better? No, that's insane. Let's just say as a society, we're going to find a way to make sure that those kids get at least 2 nutritious meals a day. I mean, seems like very much the lesser of 2 evils.
Yeah, I got to say on this one, I recognize that I've lived a very privileged life. And it can be difficult for those of us who have literally never opened the refrigerator and not seen food in it to really appreciate the struggles that so many other Americans have gone through. There are phenomenons known as struggle meals or struggle sandwiches that millions of Americans, I say those words, they know exactly what that means. They've had the experience of having, a piece of bologna on bread. They've had the experience of bulk shopping for ramen. They've had the experience of not being able to afford a carton of eggs at any price, even outside of the recession. And the idea that someone could kind of scoff at the idea that a parent, a working parent, might not be able to afford groceries for their kids because they, with, I'm sorry, a multi-million-dollar salary, have never struggled to feed their own 3 kids. I gotta say, I find it rather distasteful. I don't blame anybody for not having had the experience of poverty, but to have not listened, to weigh in on these kinds of issues without having listened to the experiences of people who all too commonly have gone through that is dispiriting. I will say I had one eye-opening experience where in a poverty law class I took in law school, we took jobs out of a hat, kind of numbers of kids out of the hat. So we got randomly assigned these kind of family and life situations. And we're tasked with providing rent and food for our families using the social services that were available in Massachusetts, where I was living. And even in a state that has a lot of good welfare programs, social safety net programs like Massachusetts, it was a very quick wake-up call about how expensive things that most middle-class people don't think twice about really are when you're on a budget, even with the support of the state. And it's not about kids literally starving. Food insecurity is a lot more complicated than that. It's about being able to get nutritious food. It's about getting enough food to enable you to go to work, go to school and not be hungry, not have your stomach growling. It's not that you're literally got your ribs showing passing out on your front porch, but it is affecting the ability of our kids to learn and function and grow and be healthy and have appropriate cognitive development. And for that not to be a priority in a country as rich as ours, I think is a real tragedy.
Yeah, I mean, it's, exactly like you said, it's not always like that they're starving. In fact, there's an obesity epidemic, right? Whatever the problem is, this is something that this should be one of the first things a society can agree to do for children. I totally agree.
What do you make of what seems to be a growing trend of specifically attacking school lunch programs? It seems like an odd one for conservatives to want to battle it out on.
Yeah, I mean, one hopes that they're looking at data and saying, look, most of the kids are coming from, middle class families, seem to be bringing their own lunches. We're throwing a lot of food away. I actually am not seeing it that much. I mean, this is one of the first or second times that I've heard of it. And of course, the question is different if you live, if you're talking about inner city schools, right? If you're talking about schools where there are really high levels of child poverty, and then schools in a place where it's, much lower. Like I'm open to the idea that we could means test this, right? But I didn't hear that governor come out and say, look, we've means tested this, we've looked at the data, and the kids just aren't eating this food, so we don't need it, right? What he said was, I had a Cliff Bar for breakfast. I never see hungry children. Like, that's obviously not the case. So I really am not seeing it like as frequently, but I really hope that continues to be the case.
Yeah, and I actually don't think it's an urban issue at all. Rural poverty is at 19%. This is a huge issue. I mean, this was a conversation that was happening in Minnesota. This is a huge issue in people who are in quite rural locations, and I do worry about the kind of public perception of this being free lunch for urban kids, coded black and brown kids, as being part of why some Republicans might be willing to take on this issue. At least this one Republican, I shouldn't brought it out, has been willing to take on this issue as something that he actually wants to actively fight against, when in fact disproportionately, most kids on school lunch, just like most kids on all anti-poverty programs in the United States of America, are white. We are a majority white country, and even if black and brown people are disproportionately represented, in fact, most of the children that are going to be hurt by policies like these are white children, for what it's worth. Yeah.
Exactly right.
Well, that's it for this week on Rising. Sorry to go out on somewhat of a bleak topic, but it was wonderful being with you today, Batya.
Thank you for you too.
Coming up starting Monday is a very big week here at Rising. We'll be back with a new look and a stellar guest lineup, including some big names, as well as some of your Rising favorites. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss any content. And for those of you who would prefer to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. See you next week.